Well, Canada's small businesses have been among the hardest hit casualties of the pandemic. They are calling for more federal aid and easier rules for getting it as we move through the pandemic and with an upcoming budget. Corinne Pohlmann is Senior Vice President for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. You can see she joins me now. Corinne Pohlmann, thanks for taking time to speak with me. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Look, give us a sense of the landscape for small business as we speak in Canada today, trying to stay alive in the pandemic. What's been the ongoing effect of the pandemic and the restrictions on small business?
Well, in a word, it's been extremely challenging, if not dire, for many small businesses. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes for many of those businesses. In fact, just today we released some new data showing that the small businesses are even less open and less close to getting back to normal sales than they were a month ago, given increasing restrictions in many parts of Canada. In fact, only about 29% are even close back to normal revenues. So we have a long way to go before many small businesses are going to be able to be back to what it was that they were doing pre-pandemic. And so as a result, we need to see the various types of support measures that have existed continue to move on and continue to be there as long as those businesses face restrictions.
The most recent economic numbers, writ broadly, suggest there's an organic economic recovery starting to take place in the country. But how uneven is it for small business?
It's extremely uneven. There's no economic recovery happening right now among many small businesses. Certainly, there's probably some sectors that are doing better than others, but for the most part, the fact is over 70% of them are still not back to normal sales. So economic recovery has actually been backsliding over the course of the last month for many of those small businesses. And you have to remember, they represent half of Canada's economy. They employ like 60% of Canadians. So if they're not going to do well, that's going to have an impact right across the board. And so there may be elements of the economy that are starting to improve, but you're going to ask many small business owners, and they would probably tell you that from where they're sitting, there's still a long way to go.
Let's look at some of the numbers in terms of federal support programs for business, and then we'll use that as a jumping off point to continue the conversation. Federal wage subsidy program, it's provided $73 billion to 440,000 applicants. The Canada Emergency Business Account, it's channeled $46 billion in loans to 500,000 small businesses. And the rent subsidy for business has doled out $2.6 billion in supports. How useful have those programs been? Because that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, but they've been extremely critical. In fact, over 70% of our members are telling us that these particular programs, the ones you just listed, have been absolutely essential for their survival in 2021 and continue to be incredibly important. So when you're not able to make revenues, you're not able to get the sales you normally get, because you've been asked to close down your business through no fault of your own, we need to make sure that these supports continue to exist. And so we want to make sure as long as the restrictions are there, those supports have to be there. And we understand we are also worried about the growing deficit that this is bringing. But there's also a huge amount of debt being loaded on small businesses right now who really can't afford it. So it's a real balancing act. We want to get our economy going again. We have to make sure we support these businesses to the other side.
Right. So that's what you want to see in the budget. But you have raised concerns about the eligibility requirements for these federal aid programs and how some new businesses are being excluded. So you want to see continuing supports when the budget comes out on Monday, but what about the eligibility requirements? What changes do you want to see?
Yeah, the biggest one is one you just touched on. It's new businesses. So any business that actually started prior to March 1st, 2020, or sorry, after March 1st, 2020, they've actually not been able to access pretty much any of these programs at the federal level. And so they've sort of been struggling for over a year now to sort of keep their business going. Like, think about it. If you started planning to open a business prior to March 1st, but because of logistics or whatever the case might be, you couldn't really open it till afterwards, you're sort of stuck right now because none of these programs are helping you. And so we hear a lot from these businesses who are really struggling at the moment. There's also various small tweaks we still think need to be made to some of the programs to make them more accessible. And so those are some of the things we're going to be looking for on that budget on Monday.
Right. I mean, to the issue of eligibility, the federal government has consistently replied here, look, we can't include new businesses that weren't operating when the pandemic hit because they have no pre-pandemic baseline revenues to compare losses to. So is that a valid reason for saying, look, we don't know, we can't compensate them in these programs?
Well, I think that we can find ways to be creative. We've certainly suggested things like looking at the industry average for that particular sector in that community and comparing it to what the industry average is. We've seen provincial programs in the meantime become available, and many of them are being offered to new businesses. So they're using different sort of criteria to help those newer businesses access those programs. So there are ways to do it, and we're just sort of encouraging the government to be creative and look at ways that that can be done for newer businesses as well.
All right, Corinne Pohlmann from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We'll look ahead of the budget Monday and see if some of your concerns are answered. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.